listen, why do you think, though, Stephanie, Powell seems so cavalier yesterday? He just seems sort of matter of fact, yeah, don't worry about it. We looked at the CPI, some adjusted, some didn't. You know, like he's comfortable with being higher for longer. What is that all about?
Well, if there's one thing that the Federal Reserve has in spades, it's arrogance, and it's unfounded arrogance, because their track record is absolutely abysmal. I mean, I love Madison's analogy of the tightrope walker, because my favorite description of the Federal Reserve Board is monetary magoos, and if there's anyone who can't navigate a tightrope, it's Mr. Magoo. So, but anyway, all kidding aside, I think that, you know, this Fed is obviously still atoning for their transitory sins, having labeled inflation transitory and then watched it go up to 9% in their face, and then moved to, you know, acknowledge that it was more durable precisely as it peaked and began to move lower by, you know, forces that were naturally unfolding anyway, like the alleviation of the supply chain issues. So this Fed has not a clue, but that doesn't make it distinct from any other Fed that we've seen over the last several decades. So my forecast has generally been status quo, and that is that the Fed has already over-tightened, but they won't realize that until after the wheels fall off, which they're starting to do already in the economy. It hasn't yet manifest or been reflected in the markets, but I believe that that will. Right. At which point the Fed will panic and reverse course, and they'll overstimulate, and then we'll have the inflation problem again, and lather, rinse, repeat.
You know, the funny thing
am I too jaded?
No, listen, this is why we love you. But you do the work, right? I mean, people, listen, you've got a strong reputation on Wall Street, and you're seen as a voice of reason. There's an echo chamber, particularly amongst economists, and this is why I love having you on the show. By the way, I was going to say, Mr. Magoo, though, always did find a way to land on his feet. One thing that bothers me is that they keep saying they're data dependent, right? They've got 400 PhDs. They can't figure anything out until the data comes out. But who can depend on the data anymore?
Yeah. Well, and he acknowledged that when he was asked the question about the employment data specifically, and acknowledged that maybe the payroll report could be a tad overstated, I think was his phrase. Yeah. But there's so many statistics that are screaming recession, and the unemployment rate would be the first among them. You know, when you've seen a 0.5 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, you're usually in recession at that point. So even though it sounds like a modest uptick, because it's such a lagging indicator, by the time you get to that point, the ship has sailed. And then there are a variety of other recession signals. I mean, look at real retail sales. I've been highlighting this for months and months and months. Real retail sales, which is retail sales adjusted for higher prices, have gone nowhere for 2 years now. I mean, that's a classic recession signal right there. The drop in full-time employment, another recession signal. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Restaurant traffic is one of my favorite ones right now. We're seeing just a complete collapse in restaurant activity, and obviously you've seen all the bankruptcy filings.
Yeah. Let me jump in here because we got only a minute, less than a minute to go. I got to ask you, because this is a debate that I'm trying to bring up and get into the conversation. Fiscal dominance. What does it mean for you, and could we be there now, or how far away might we be?
Well, I think we definitely are in a period where the federal government is the marginal borrower and the marginal driver of economic activity, and that's obviously not an inspiring backdrop for investing. But putting that aside, this raises the problem of how we finance all these deficits as the government becomes really the impetus for growth. And the answer in an environment where foreign central banks are running, not walking, running the other way. You know, the dollar share of global forex reserves hit a 29-year low last quarter as foreigners decide they don't want to hold dollars that are constantly being debased by the central bank. So the answer is there's no other buyer for our paper other than a manufactured buyer from the Federal Reserve. And again, that's a real problem, and it only accelerates the flight out of the dollar. But, you know, I said this when the housing bubble was getting ready to burst. I said, you know, we're going to have a period where we have unconventional monetary policy, and QE will start as a sort of discretionary policy, but it will become a deficit financing necessity that exists in perpetuity. And I think we're going to see that. They may call it by a different name so they don't have to embarrass themselves by calling it QE again for the fourth time. But they'll find a way to re-expand the balance sheet and monetize this debt. And that's really the only option at this point.
Wow. Great stuff, although scary stuff. Stephanie, thank you very much.
Exactly.
All righty.
Buy gold. Bye.
Well, that's